The electric current hit Sheriff Karen the moment she touched my gate. She screamed and stumbled backward, her hands smoking from the contact. Her deputies rushed to help her as she clutched her burned palm, staring at me with pure hatred through the chain-link fence. "You cannot do this to me," she shrieked. "This is community property now." I looked her straight in the eye and said the words that would end her career forever. "Sheriff, this is my land, and I have it all on camera. 3 generations of my family had worked this land. 40 acres of rolling pasture in Cedar Valley, where the morning mist hung low over the hills and the cattle moved slow and peaceful through the grass. My grandfather built the first barn here in 1952. My father expanded it in the 80s. And when he passed 5 years ago, he left it all to me with one simple instruction written in his will: protect what we built. I woke every morning at 5:30 to the sound of my cattle calling for their feed. The routine never changed. Check the water troughs, mend the fences where needed, walk the property line to make sure everything was secure. This was not just a ranch to me. It was my sanctuary, my heritage, the place where I could think clearly and work with my hands. The nearest neighbor lived 2 miles down the dirt road. We waved when we passed each other in town, but mostly we kept to ourselves. That was the way of things in Cedar Valley. You minded your own business, and people minded theirs. Sheriff Karen used to drive by during her patrols. She would slow down at my gate and wave. Sometimes she would stop to chat about the weather or ask how the cattle were doing. She seemed professional enough, even friendly. I had no reason to think anything was wrong with her. "Beautiful morning," she said one day in early spring, leaning against her patrol car door. "Sure is," I replied, adjusting my work gloves. "Cattle are happy. Grass is coming in good." "You are lucky to have all this space," she said, looking around at my fields. "Most people will never own this much land." I nodded politely. My family worked hard for it. She smiled, but something in her eyes felt different that day. Calculating, like she was measuring something, but I brushed it off and went back to my work. Cedar Valley was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone. 3,000 people spread across 50 square miles of farmland and forest. We had 1 grocery store, 2 gas stations, and a diner that served the best chicken fried steak in the county. Crime was mostly drunk driving and the occasional domestic dispute. Nothing that would require a sheriff with big city ambitions. But I did not know that yet. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning in late April. I was fixing a section of fence near the road when Sheriff Karen pulled up in her patrol car. But this time she was not alone. She had a clipboard in her hand and a look on her face that told me this was not a social visit. "Morning," I said, setting down my hammer. "We need to talk," she said, walking toward me with authority in her step. "I have received several complaints about your property." "Complaints?" I asked. "What kind of complaints?" She flipped through the papers on her clipboard like she was reading from a legal document. "Zoning violations, environmental hazards. Your cattle are creating runoff that affects the county water table, and these fences, they do not meet current safety standards." I stared at her. My family had been raising cattle on this land for 70 years. The county had never once cited us for any violations. My fences were built to last and maintained properly. And as for water runoff, every rancher in the valley had cattle. It made no sense. "Can I see those complaints?" I asked. "This is official county business," she said, pulling the clipboard back. "I need full access to inspect your entire property. Today." "Do you have a warrant?" Her face changed. The friendly neighbor disappeared and something cold took its place. "I do not need a warrant for health and safety violations. I am ordering you to comply." I kept my voice calm and respectful. "Sheriff, I would be happy to work with you on any legitimate concerns, but I need to see the actual violations you are talking about, and I need to understand what authority you are using to demand access to my private property." "My authority is this badge," she said, tapping her chest, "and if you do not cooperate, I will have no choice but to take further action." That night, I drove to the county courthouse and spent 3 hours going through public records. I looked up every zoning ordinance she had mentioned. I checked the environmental regulations for livestock operations. I even pulled the original survey maps for my property. Not a single thing she had told me was accurate. The zoning laws she cited were from 1987 and had been repealed. The environmental regulations only applied to operations with more than 500 head of cattle. I had 40, and the fence standards she mentioned did not exist in our county code at all. Sheriff Karen had lied to me, but why? 2 days later, she came back. This time, she brought a deputy with her. "Have you considered my requests?" she asked. "I have considered them," I said, "and I researched every regulation you mentioned. None of them apply to my property." Her jaw tightened. "Are you calling me a liar?" "I am saying the laws you cited do not exist or do not apply here. If you have legitimate concerns, I am willing to discuss them, but I will not allow unreasonable searches of my property based on false information." She stepped closer to me, close enough that I could smell the coffee on her breath. "You have no idea who you are dealing with." "I think I am starting to figure that out." The next phase of Sheriff Karen's plan was so outrageous that I almost could not believe it was happening. She returned the following week with what she called an emergency community health order. She had 3 county vehicles with her this time, plus 2 men in suits who introduced themselves as county surveyors. "By the authority vested in me by Cedar Valley County," she announced, reading from an official-looking document, "I am declaring this property to be acquired under eminent domain for community use." I felt the blood drain from my face. Eminent domain, for what? "The county has voted to establish a new public park and recreation area. Your land has been selected as the optimal location for this community resource." One of the surveyors was already unloading equipment from his truck. The other was taking photographs of my barn and house. They moved with the confidence of people who had done this before. "When did the county vote on this?" I asked. "I never received any notice of a public hearing." "The vote was conducted in emergency session due to health concerns," Karen said. "Your cattle operation poses ongoing risks to community welfare." I watched in disbelief as the surveyors began marking boundaries with orange spray paint. They were treating my property like it already belonged to them, like I was just some trespasser who needed to be managed. "You cannot do this," I said. "This is my family's land. We have clear title going back decades." "The community's needs supersede individual property claims," Karen replied. "You have 30 days to relocate your livestock and remove any personal property you wish to keep." "Where am I supposed to go?" "That is not my concern." I spent that evening on the phone with every county office I could reach. The planning department had no record of any park proposal. The county clerk had no documentation of any emergency vote. The assessor's office still listed me as the sole owner of the property. When I called the county attorney's office, the secretary put me on hold for 10 minutes before coming back with a strange message. "The county attorney says he cannot discuss ongoing land acquisition cases." "What ongoing case?" I asked. "I was never notified of any legal proceedings." I am sorry, sir. That is all the information I can provide. The next morning I drove to the state capitol and hired a property rights attorney named David Chen. He was a small man with wire-rimmed glasses who specialized in cases involving government overreach. "This is completely illegal," he said after reviewing the documents Karen had shown me. "Eminent domain requires extensive legal procedures, public hearings, fair compensation, due process. None of that has happened here. So what can I do?" "We can file an injunction to stop any further activity on your property. But first, I need to understand what Sheriff Karen is really after. This is not about a public park. No county would go through this kind of trouble for 40 acres of ranch land." "Then what is it about?" "That is what we need to find out." When I got home that afternoon, I found Karen and her crew had returned. They had set up a surveyor's transit in the middle of my pasture and were measuring distances between my buildings. My cattle were huddled in the far corner of the field, spooked by all the activity. "Get off my property," I called out. "This is county property now," Karen replied without looking up from her clipboard. "You are the one who is trespassing." "I have not signed anything. No court order has been issued. You have no legal right to be here." She walked over to me with that same cold smile I was beginning to know too well. "If you interfere with official county business, I will arrest you for obstruction of justice." "On whose authority?" "On mine." That night I could not sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a pot of coffee, diving deeper into property law than I had ever wanted to go. I read about eminent domain cases. I studied sheriff's powers. I researched every legal precedent I could find for government land seizures. But the more I learned, the angrier I became. What Karen was doing was not just illegal, it was criminal. At 3 in the morning, I found something that changed everything. A news article from 2 counties over about a rancher named Bill Morrison who had lost his land in a similar situation. The headline read, "Local rancher loses family farm to mysterious county acquisition." I called Bill as soon as it was a reasonable hour. "You are not the first person to contact me about this," he said when I explained my situation. "Sheriff Karen tried the same thing on 3 other properties that I know of." "What happened to your land?" 6 months after I was forced to sell, it got rezoned for commercial development. A big box store went up where my house used to be. Karen's brother-in-law was the contractor who built it. My stomach turned. So this is all about money. It is about power and money. She finds properties she wants, manufactures legal justification to seize them, then sells them to developers for a profit. The county government is either in on it or too intimidated to stop her. Bill gave me the phone numbers of 2 other property owners who had been targeted. Tom Jenkins had lost 20 acres to a water conservation project that never materialized. Sarah Mitchell had been forced to sell her farm after Karen declared it a public health hazard due to imaginary soil contamination. "The worst part," Sarah told me, "is that nobody believes you when you try to tell them what happened. She is the sheriff. People trust her word over yours." "Did any of you fight back legally?" Tom tried, spent $15,000 on lawyers and still lost everything. The system is rigged when the sheriff is the one breaking the law. But I was not ready to give up, not yet. I scheduled another meeting with David Chen and brought him everything I had learned about Karen's other victims. "This is a clear pattern of corruption," he said, spreading the documents across his desk. "The problem is proving it in court. She has been careful to make everything look legal on the surface." What if we could prove she never followed proper procedures? That would help, but we need more than procedural violations. We need evidence of criminal intent. How do we get that? We make her overplay her hand. People like Sheriff Karen always get sloppy when they think they are winning. David helped me file a restraining order to prevent any further activity on my property while we prepared our case. The judge granted a temporary injunction, which meant Karen could not bring her surveyors back until there was a proper hearing. When I served Karen with the court papers, her face went red with rage. "You have no idea what you are getting yourself into," she said. "I think I do. I am the law in this county. I decide what happens and what does not happen. And what is going to happen is that you are going to lose your ranch, your cattle, and probably a lot more than that." Is that a threat, Sheriff? It is a promise. But I had already made a promise of my own, to my father, to protect what we built. And I was not going to break it. The restraining order bought me time, but I knew it was temporary. Karen would find a way around it eventually. She had too much power and too many connections in the local government. If I was going to protect my property, I needed to take matters into my own hands. That is when I decided to build the electric fence. I drove to the farm supply store in the next county over and bought everything I needed. Industrial-grade electric fencing, warning signs, motion sensors, security cameras. If Karen wanted to trespass on my property, she was going to pay a price for it. The salesman who helped me was an older guy named Pete, who had been in the business for 30 years. "This is some serious equipment," he said as he loaded the materials into my truck. "You planning to keep out bears?" "Something like that." "Well, this will definitely do the job. Just make sure you post plenty of warning signs. Last thing you want is somebody getting hurt and suing you." I spent the next week installing the fence around my entire property perimeter. It was backbreaking work, but I had never been more motivated in my life. Every post I drove into the ground was an act of defiance. Every wire I strung was a declaration of independence. The electric fence delivered a shock that was painful but not dangerous. About the same voltage you would get from touching a car battery. Enough to make someone let go immediately, but not enough to cause permanent injury. I made sure to install warning signs every 50 feet along the fence line. Danger electric fence in bright red letters. Private property, no trespassing. Electric shock hazard. Nobody could claim they had not been warned. I also set up a network of security cameras that covered every angle of approach to my property. Motion-activated lights, recording equipment that backed up to cloud storage so nobody could destroy the evidence. If Karen tried anything else, I would have it all documented. The first test came sooner than I expected. 3 days after I finished the installation, Karen drove up to my gate. She got out of her patrol car with that same arrogant swagger she always had. But this time, when she reached for the gate latch, something different happened. The electric current hit her the moment her hand made contact with the metal. She screamed and jerked backward, stumbling into the dirt road. The shock was brief, but intense enough to get her full attention. "What the hell is that?" she yelled, clutching her hand. "Electric fence," I called out from my porch, clearly marked with warning signs. "You cannot electrify a fence on public access roads." "This is not a public access road. This is my private driveway, and that fence is on my private property." She pulled out her radio and called for backup. Within 20 minutes, I had 3 patrol cars and a fire truck in front of my gate. The fire chief was a reasonable man named Robert who had known my family for years. The fence is legal, he told Karen after inspecting the installation. It is properly marked and not more powerful than standard livestock fencing. He has every right to protect his property. This is obstruction of a police investigation. What investigation? Robert asked. I do not see any active warrants or court orders. Karen's face was turning red. She was not used to being challenged, especially not in front of other county officials. I am ordering you to remove this fence immediately, she said to me. On what legal authority? On my authority as sheriff of this county. That is not how the law works, Karen, and you know it. She stared at me through the chain link and electric wire with pure hatred. But for the first time since this whole thing started, she could not touch me. The fence had created a physical barrier between her corrupt power and my constitutional rights. This is not over, she said. No, it is not. But now the battlefield had changed. She could no longer simply walk onto my property and intimidate me. If she wanted to continue her illegal land grab, she would have to find another way. And I would be ready for her. Sheriff Karen did not take well to being denied access to my property. The electric fence had wounded her pride as much as it had shocked her hand. Within a week, she was back with the biggest show of force I had ever seen in Cedar Valley. She arrived on a Thursday morning with 6 patrol cars, 2 county vehicles, and what looked like half the sheriff's department. She had also brought along the county fire marshal, the building inspector, and a man in a suit who introduced himself as the county attorney. By the time they finished setting up, it looked like a scene from a movie. Police cars parked at angles across the road, deputies standing around with their hands on their weapons. All of this focused on one man standing behind an electric fence on his own property. But Karen had made a critical mistake. The commotion had attracted attention from my neighbors. People started showing up to see what was happening. Cars pulled over on the main road. Folks walked up from nearby farms. And most importantly, several people started taking videos with their cell phones. This is your last chance, Karen announced through a bullhorn she had brought for the occasion. Remove this fence and surrender access to county officials, or you will be arrested for obstruction of justice. I walked to the gate, careful not to touch the electrified portion, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Sheriff, I am standing on my own private property behind a legally installed fence. I have committed no crime. I have violated no laws. I have a court-issued restraining order that prohibits county interference with this property. What exactly are you arresting me for? You are interfering with a county land acquisition. What land acquisition? Show me the legal documents. Show me the court orders. Show me the public hearings where this was approved. She did not have an answer for that, because no such documents existed. I do not have to justify county business to you. Actually, Sheriff, you do. This is America. Government officials are required to follow the law just like everyone else. The crowd was getting bigger. Someone had started live streaming the confrontation on social media. I could see people pointing their phones at Karen as she grew more frustrated and unprofessional by the minute. You people need to disperse, she yelled at the growing crowd. This is official police business. This is a public road, called out Tom Morrison, one of my neighbors. We have every right to be here. And we have every right to film police activity, added Sarah Chen, who had driven over from her farm 2 miles away. Karen was losing control of the situation. She was used to intimidating isolated individuals, not dealing with public scrutiny. And the more people watched, the more erratic her behavior became. Deputy Jackson, she ordered one of her officers, Arrest that man for trespassing." The deputy looked confused. "Sheriff, he is on his own property. He is trespassing on county land." "Ma'am, there is no court order establishing county ownership of this property. I cannot make an arrest without probable cause." I had never seen Karen look so angry. Her face was red, her hands were shaking, and she was clearly losing whatever professional composure she had pretended to have. "If you do not follow my orders, you will be written up for insubordination." "Sheriff," the deputy said quietly, "I think we should step back and reassess this situation." But Karen was beyond reason. She grabbed the radio from her belt and started screaming into it. "I need additional units at the Morrison Ranch immediately. We have a hostile situation with an armed and dangerous suspect." "Armed and dangerous," I called out. "I am standing behind a fence on my own property. I have no weapons. I have threatened no one." The crowd was getting restless. People were starting to murmur to each other. Cell phone cameras were capturing every word of Karen's increasingly unhinged rants. "Ma'am," the county attorney finally spoke up, "perhaps we should discuss this back at the office. I am not leaving until that fence comes down." "Sheriff," I said calmly, looking directly into one of the cell phone cameras, "you are violating your oath of office. You are harassing a law-abiding citizen. You are trespassing on private property, and you are doing it all in front of witnesses with cameras. You do not know who you are messing with." "I know exactly who I am messing with. A corrupt sheriff who thinks her badge makes her above the law." The video of that confrontation was online within an hour. By evening, it had been shared thousands of times across social media. The local news picked it up. Then the state news. By the next morning, Sheriff Karen's public meltdown had gone viral. And that was the beginning of the end for her. The viral video changed everything. What had been a local dispute between a sheriff and a rancher suddenly became a national story about government overreach and abuse of power. The footage of Karen screaming at me through an electric fence while I calmly stood my ground struck a nerve with millions of viewers. The first call I received was from a reporter with the state newspaper. "Mr. Morrison, we would like to do a story about your situation with Sheriff Karen. Can you tell us more about these land acquisition claims?" Within days, investigative journalists were digging into Karen's background and her previous dealings with other property owners. What they found was a pattern of corruption that went back years. The story that emerged was even worse than I had imagined. Karen had been systematically targeting rural property owners with valuable land, using her position as sheriff to intimidate them into selling at below-market prices. She had connections with several real estate developers who would then purchase the properties and flip them for massive profits. Bill Morrison's farm had been sold to a development company owned by Karen's brother-in-law for $30,000. It was later resold for $300,000. Tom Jenkins' land had been acquired for water conservation and then leased to a fracking company. Sarah Mitchell's farm had been declared contaminated and sold to a waste management firm that never found any contamination. The state attorney general opened an investigation. The FBI got involved. Internal Affairs launched a review of every case Karen had handled in the past 5 years. My attorney, David Chen, filed federal civil rights violations against Karen and the county. He also helped the other victims file their own lawsuits. What had started as my personal fight for my ranch became a class action case representing dozens of property owners. "This is bigger than we thought," David told me during one of our strategy meetings. "We are not just dealing with a corrupt sheriff. We are looking at an organized conspiracy to defraud property owners across multiple counties. The video evidence from my security cameras became crucial to the case. I had hours of footage showing Karen and her associates trespassing on my property, making false claims, and attempting to intimidate me into compliance. But the moment that sealed her fate was the recording of her public meltdown at my gate. Her own words, captured on dozens of cell phone cameras, proved that she had no legal authority for any of her actions. "You cannot argue with video evidence," the federal prosecutor told me. She convicted herself. The county was forced to settle our lawsuit for $2 million. Karen was suspended without pay pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. 3 other county officials were also suspended for their roles in the conspiracy. The state legislature passed new laws requiring additional oversight of eminent domain cases. Counties would now be required to hold public hearings, provide detailed justification for land seizures, and offer fair market compensation before any acquisition could proceed. My ranch was officially confirmed as private property under my sole ownership. All claims by the county were formally dismissed. The bogus environmental violations were removed from the record. Even the fake zoning issues were wiped clean. Karen's trial lasted 3 weeks. She was convicted on 17 felony counts including fraud, extortion, civil rights violations, and abuse of office. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in federal prison. Sheriff Karen thought she could use her badge to steal from honest citizens, the judge said during sentencing. This court will not tolerate corruption at any level of government. As I sat in that courtroom watching Karen being led away in handcuffs, I thought about my father's final instruction to protect what we built. I had done more than protect it. I had helped protect the rights of every property owner in the state. The electric fence was still standing around my property, but now it was not just a barrier against trespassers. It had become a symbol of what happens when ordinary citizens refuse to let corrupt officials trample on their constitutional rights. Life returned to its peaceful rhythm on my ranch, but nothing was quite the same as before. The cattle still needed feeding every morning. The fences still needed mending. The grass still grew green after the spring rains. But now my property carried a weight of history that had not been there before. The electric fence remained in place, though I rarely needed to turn it on anymore. It served more as a reminder than an active deterrent. Visitors would often stop at the gate and ask about the story they had heard on the news or seen online. "Is this the place where you shocked that crooked sheriff?" they would ask. "This is the place where I defended my constitutional rights," I would answer. Karen was serving her sentence in federal prison, but her impact on the community continued. The investigation had revealed corruption that went far beyond land theft. Evidence of planted drugs, falsified reports, and intimidation of witnesses came to light during the trial. Dozens of her previous cases were reopened and reviewed. The new sheriff was a man named Robert Hayes who had been a deputy in the neighboring county for 15 years. His first official act was to issue a public apology to all the property owners who had been harassed by his predecessor. "Law enforcement exists to protect citizens, not to prey on them," he said at his swearing-in ceremony. "That is a trust I take very seriously." Tom Jenkins got his land back through the civil settlement. Sarah Mitchell was able to purchase a new farm with her portion of the damages. Bill Morrison used his settlement money to start a nonprofit organization that provides legal assistance to rural property owners facing government overreach. My own settlement allowed me to expand my herd and improve my facilities. But more importantly, it sent a message that corruption has consequences, even when it comes from people in positions of authority. The story had national impact beyond our small county. Property rights organizations used my case as an example of effective citizen resistance. Law schools started teaching about the Morrison case in their civil rights courses. Rural advocacy groups invited me to speak at conferences about defending against government overreach. But I remained a rancher at heart. My real satisfaction came from the simple work of caring for my cattle and maintaining my land, the same work my grandfather and father had done before me. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting over the hills, I would walk the fence line and remember the confrontation that had changed everything. The memory of Karen's face when that electric current hit her still made me smile. She had thought she could take everything from me because she had a badge and I was just a rancher. She had underestimated the power of truth, the strength of community, and the importance of constitutional rights. The electric fence around my property had become more than just a barrier. It was a symbol of what happens when ordinary people refuse to surrender to corrupt authority. It proved that sometimes the best defense against government overreach is simply saying no and meaning it. My father's instruction to protect what we built had led me to protect something much larger. Not just my ranch, but the principle that in America, your property rights matter. Your constitutional rights matter. And no one, regardless of their title or badge, is above the law. The fence still stands, and so do I.